Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the One Drink Book Club. I'm Jamie Bowers, and my guest today is Susie Wagner. And today we'll be talking about Magpie Murders. Magpie Murders is kind of a classic whodunit with a unique twist, because the story follows a book editor who is actually editing a whodunit, and in the whodunit, you get to read it like she is reading it, like you would edit it. And then, as it turns out, the last chapter is missing. So neither of you get to have the satisfaction of getting to the ending and knowing what happens. And the her fictional author that writes it, commits suicide right when she discovers that the book is actually missing the last chapter. And so it turns into a mystery of its own, and whether or not the author was murdered or committed suicide. And so it really is two whodunits wrapped in one. So, Susie, welcome to the show. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jimmy, for having me. I can't believe you just gave a spoiler away without, a little spoiler alert. Pause now if you don't want part of the book ruined for you. I mean, we find this out relatively early, but all right, I'm triggered.
I don't know that I gave too much away. I mean, maybe a
It's a
little bit,
whodunit,
sure.
Jamie. We got to be careful. More importantly, this is the One Drink Book Club. Tell me about that. What does that
So,
mean?
the One Drink Book Club is the thought is that I'm picking books and guests that I like to chat with, and trying to, on each podcast, picking a drink that is inspired by the book. And
Okay.
so that is one of my first questions for you, Susie, is what drink did you bring tonight? Ooh, what is this?
This is called a magpie murder. I'm kidding. It's not. It's actually it's a variation on an old fashioned that I had at the Kennedy Center about a couple weeks ago, and they add like a soda to it, like just a little splash of soda on top, so it tasted very refreshing because I kind of think old fashioned's more wintry. But this is a
Interesting.
really
Uh,
tasty drink.
It's funny, the last episode, the my guest had an old fashioned that was a Wisconsin old fashioned that
Yeah,
has a little bit of sparkling water in it.
yeah, that's
Um,
this.
but he also has an olive and some olive juice, so it's a little more savory,
Yeah, I did not
which is kind
know
of
that.
interesting.
Yeah. Well, in fact, that's what they were making at the Kennedy Center. But this, I was like, you know what? I put a little extra bitters in it, so it has a reddish hue. Reminds me of murder. And I just thought old fashioned because part of the book is when she died. Our book editor Susan, no relation, dives into reading the story. It kind of flashes back in post World War England, and so I was like, well, what's better than an old fashioned for that time period? What are you
I
having
think
tonight?
that's a great choice. That's a great choice. My drink tonight, I was trying to go through and see which drink kind of popped out in my mind. And there's a scene in it when Susan Ryland, our main character, who is the book editor,
Mhm.
goes to the funeral of her client, the author who writes the Magpie Murders.
Alan Conway,
And
a man
that
she does not
evening,
like.
she what's that? It was not liked, right.
Yeah, he's not
She
liked.
does not like.
Mhm.
Interesting twist there. But she goes to dinner with the author's estranged boyfriend, who
Lava.
has lover who has inherited all of his wealth. Um, and I thought it was strange that this character, James Taylor,
Frasier.
decides to order a bottle of champagne for their dinner on the night of his boyfriend's funeral. So I am drinking a glass of champagne
Oh, a little
because
bubbly.
that stuck in my mind.
So I will say this. So when I first discovered Anthony Horowitz, who is the real author of this book, not Alan Conway, but when I discovered Anthony Horowitz, he was famous for a children's book series called Alex Rider, and then I learned he had written quite a lot for television. In the UK, I think Foyle's War and Midsummer Murders, and Magpie Murders was the first book I had read by Anthony Horowitz, and I fell in love with it because it gave you extra. It reminded me of what I liked about reading when I was little with my grandma. I would read Agatha Christie's with her and discuss them. And I thought he added, that same sort of feeling and that same sort of genre. But I like the book inside a book. I feel like it's like an Easter egg. It gives you a little, special. And I had recently finished reading the Outlander series, and the main character there is James Fraser or Jamie Fraser. So when I found out that there was a character named Jamie Fraser, I'm like, sold.
so so I read Outlander too because I am a fan of historical fiction,
Yeah,
and
it's
it's a
hot.
long book. And then I liked that the main characters who's all hunky is named Jamie, that like,
That's what I'm
added
saying.
value. But
James
I got
Alexander
about
Mackenzie
halfway through
Fraser.
it.
Mhm.
I got halfway through it and I thought, "Wait a second. I think this is like a romance
Yeah,
novel."
it
Like it
is.
hadn't occurred to me until that point. And then I like looked up reviews and I was like, "Oh yeah, it totally is."
Yeah.
And then I'm like, "But I'm too invested to like stop."
Right?
So then though I get to, whatever page 900 or whatever it was, like pretty close to the end, and I thought, "They are not wrapping this up. Like
No.
this is going to go on for books and books." And I said,
Book
I'm done. I
9 just
can't.
came out? Maybe book
I,
9?
I
Yeah,
think so. Yeah,
yeah.
I couldn't commit for the long term with
It's hot though,
Outlander.
dude. There's nothing wrong with Outlander. That's for another book club, but I also enjoyed that book. Happy to talk about it whenever you want to.
Um, do you like? Are you a big fan of whodunits, like the Agatha Christie series and all of those?
I mean, I used to be, and I guess that's what it was. I mean, I was sort of looking for something to read. I read Magpie Murders, like, last summer or maybe the summer before. It's not a brand new book,
Yeah.
but I accidentally downloaded on Audible, and I think I was running around and doing stuff, and I spent 8 hours listening to it. I couldn't stop. I was like completely sucked in. I'm like, oh, and then the author. So I've read it the book form, and I've listened to it on Audible. And there's something about the accent, it just kind of pulled me in. And Atticus Punt, who is the main character of the book inside the book, he's sort of a Hercule Poirot kind of Agatha Christie hero, and in fact, Agatha Christie's grandson makes an appearance in this book.
He does, and clearly not a mistake or not a coincidence.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, again, it's kind of the book within a book
Mhm.
thing, but there's a lot of references to Agatha Christie, and the fake book inside there even lifts elements from Agatha Christie's that they
Mhm.
figured out that he was basically kind of plagiarizing in some degree, or at
She
least
was on his
stealing
reference
ideas from.
bookshelf, right? He had some of her books on reference on the
Yeah,
bookshelf with
yeah,
thesauruses and things like that. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
totally.
I think that, while it's not always my go-to, it's definitely kind of a guilty pleasure, especially in the summer. I spent my summers with my grandparents, and so on a hot night, I'm like, I better dive into a mystery. This is what we do in the summer. And I kind of enjoyed this one. And reading it again to prep to be with you tonight, um, I liked it just as much, and I think in some ways I liked it more because I was able to suss out some of those Easter eggs and pay attention to some of those details. And it just made me appreciate Horowitz's thoughtfulness as an author.
I agree. Now, and I like whodunits, but I find them to be different than thrillers.
Yeah,
I mean, and the reason is like with thrillers, I really enjoy trying to figure out what really is going to happen. I feel
yeah,
like the whodunits, they purposely try to make it so hard. Like
mhm,
they lead you down all these false paths.
yeah,
You're clearly supposed to think, oh, well, that happened, so he's the one who did it. And
right,
ooh, that they just told us this, so he's the one who did it. And
yeah.
so I almost get discouraged, like, with Agatha Christie's, I almost never know who did it at the end, and so in some ways, I just kinda go along for the ride, whereas with thrillers, it's just slightly different. I feel like I have more of a chance of figuring out the ending.
So did you figure out this one?
No, not at all. I was totally off on this. Um, but, again, I kinda feel like there is the intention to deceive.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um
definitely.
and they there's and again, not to do too much of a giveaway or a spoiler. When she realizes that she is missing a chapter,
Mhm.
you're just about, I mean, it's kind of like there's half a line that says so and so is the one who did it,
Yeah.
and you think, wait a second, like that doesn't make sense at all. And so you have to wait until really the end of the book when those chapters are found.
Spoiler.
So, well, yeah, okay. I think people are going to realize you're going to find it eventually. I mean, it'd be really cruel just to like leave it hanging out there.
Well, so that's the thing too. It's when you were reading it, um, was there a part that you liked better? Like, did you like this? Because it felt very real, right? It's like this real woman. She's in the middle of doing her job, and then she's like, "Wait, I'm reading." She's an editor, which was actually that was my fantasy job. You know, like George Costanza was the architect, and my fantasy job when I was in college. You know, maybe sneaking into bars underage. I don't know if somebody asked what I did for a living because my ID said I was 23 when I was not. I was a book editor, and so that was my fantasy job. And so reading this story about a book editor, I was like, "Oh, this is it. This is what it's like. I should do
This
it."
is
And then
me.
suddenly, you know, she's in a very precarious position where she's investigating a murder and, you know, what's gonna happen to her, you know, that's not a safe hobby, right?
No. So you want to be my latex salesman? Is that your? This is that you
Mandalay
Vandalay Industries.
Industries.
You
Yeah.
worked for Vandalay Industries. That was the or no, you could do pendant publishing.
Yeah, see?
Really,
I
if we're
told
gonna
you
go with
that's good.
Seinfeld theme,
Yeah,
then that
my
would be
husband
it.
used to have that T-shirt, Mandalay Industries. Maker of fine latex products, I think it was the subhead on that. That was their tagline, maybe?
Yes. Um, well, I thought if I had to choose between the 2 stories, because 'cause I've
Yeah,
thought about that too, which one did I
yeah,
like better? And
yeah,
I kind of liked the book within the book better.
yeah, same.
Because I did like Atticus Punt.
Yeah,
I thought he was a good character.
yeah.
I liked the little, English village that it all took place
It's
in.
darling, right?
Yeah,
It
and
felt
and
very
I thought
real.
it did feel very real, and the vicar and all the various
The
characters.
nudist. Talk about giving things away, but I think
Now
that could
you're blaming
entice
me for
people.
spoilers.
Well, it could entice people to wanna read it. Now you've got a
That's
vicar in
true.
a village who likes to run around without his pants on, that's kind of exciting, with his wife, I mean, not
With his
creepy.
wife,
Yeah.
just to be clear, yes. Yeah, so I thought that was fun, and again, I did not see where it was going. Like,
Yeah.
I really was surprised at the reveal as to what had happened.
A lot happens in it, you know, and
Yeah.
I do like that there was, you know, it comes to, you know, not spoiler, it comes to a satisfying conclusion. You feel like, you know, all of the loose ends have been tied up, and that you know who done it times two. And so I think that that's one of the things I like about not only Magpie Murders, but as I found other Horowitz books, he really, as an author, puts a lot of thought into the process. In fact, we're not chatting about this, but I will raise up that his new series, they're the Hawthorne Investigates books. That's not their title; they're all tied into
Mm.
like literary titles. But Anthony Horowitz puts himself as a character, so he is
Oh, interesting.
yeah. So he's tied with a detective who he also doesn't like, which is a really interesting technique for an author to write about somebody they don't care for. You know,
Well, speaking of, detectives, that was the one relationship in the book within a book that I thought didn't make sense was the
Mm.
detective Chubb. Um, because Chubb was kinda like, "Oh, Atticus, you're here. Great. Meddle with me.
Take
Like, you're
over.
probably gonna solve it for me, less work for me." But, like, he had no ego whatsoever and, like, completely didn't feel like, or it didn't seem like he was upset that, Atticus was coming in to his turf and telling him, what to do and who to investigate.
Yeah.
Which maybe I've watched too many cop shows, but I thought that was an unrealistic human reaction.
But I think that they mentioned that, and I'm sorry because I started reading the sequel to this book, so I'm not sure if it
Mm,
was in Magpie Murders or in whatever Moonrise Murders, the next one. But they explain that. So Alan Conway, the author of the murdered author, he was kind of a bastard, and
yeah.
he made
Oh, totally.
horrible, yeah, caricatures of real life people and kind of twisted their stories, and so he was having fun with the real life detective that he met. And I think that's why he turned Chubb into such a caricature and somebody who was not believable. It's like, okay, world famous detective, do your thing.
Yeah.
And maybe because it was post war England, you know, it's just a simpler time. You know, they kind of had this like lovely meandering way of telling the story. But um, I really enjoyed it. I thought that the characters, you know, to your point, were sort of believable. And what was funny is I liked the fake characters, the ones I knew were characters inside the book, even more than the their real life counterparts. But I thought he did a lot of nice job, with that
Yeah,
tribute.
yeah. Now I have not seen. Have you watched any of the Masterpiece Theater like TV version of this book?
No, I did. I turned it on the other night, and this was when Eric was out of town taking our daughter to her new apartment in Chicago, and I'm like, "Ooh, Magpie Murders," and I was on the phone with him, and he's like, "Oh, I'd like to watch that." I'm like, "Duh! Why did I say anything? Like I should be murdered. That was dumb. Like this is when you become a character in your own thing, where it's like, do you want to
Right.
watch it? Oh, you do? Ah." So I have not. Have you tried it?
I have not.
Okay.
Um, and that one, I will definitely, I will check it out because I think it would be fun. But I get the feeling because I looked at it online and I was kind of looking at the characters and the IMDb. It feels like they more heavily emphasize the Susan Ryland story
Mm.
of the book editor
Mhm.
and those characters, and then kind of the book within the book is kind of like flashbacks almost.
Oh, that's
That's how I get
interesting.
the feeling of it.
Yeah, that's pretty
Um,
interesting.
because when you read the actual book, you get one chapter of Susan Ryland, and then you get the whole, basically
A
the
long
whole
time.
entire other book,
Yeah.
and so it's a long time before she pops back up. And I don't think I have a feeling they organize it a little differently.
I actually I mean, not to sound dumb, but I kind of forgot the beginning. I'm halfway through. I got so invested with Atticus Punt and this, throwback murder mystery that I kind of then all of a sudden it ends, and then Susan comes back in with her voice saying, "Yeah, I'm frustrated too. I don't know how it ends," and I'm like, "Ah!" And then I'm like, "Oh, who are you? What?" Because
Right,
it'd
right.
been like 18 chapters or something since we'd seen her. And I kind of just slipped into this different time and space, which is also kind of funny that you can, forget where you were with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, part of the thing when I was comparing the two stories, since Atticus Punt, in some ways, I was comparing him to Alan Conway, the fake
Mhm.
author,
Oh,
for
interesting.
some whatever reason. Instead of comparing Atticus with Susan, which is really what you should have been doing, because she was trying to solve the murder and
Sure.
Atticus was trying to
Oh, yeah.
solve the murder. I was comparing Atticus with Alan, and I
Mhm.
liked Atticus a lot better than I liked Alan
Well, Alan was
because nobody
terrible.
liked Alan
Well,
Conway.
that's funny too, because they kind of kept saying, not to speak ill of the dead, but no one had anything nice to say about him. And then,
No.
to your point with his gay lover, and I was wrong. James Fraser was Atticus Punt's assistant, not Alan's lover. And what was his name again? Did you say it was
James
Jamie?
Taylor.
Oh, right, the two
But
James. Yeah,
but they were based on the same character, like,
yeah, true,
which
true.
was which was talk about a jerk move. You're dating somebody, and then you insert them into your book series as a character who is always wrong and is
And
kind of
dumb.
adult and,
Yeah,
like, pretty, pretty, but,
at least he made
dumb.
it pretty. That
Yeah,
was nice. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
but that was also kind of interesting, and that was to me was a great parallel storytelling where I think that Horowitz probably had a lot of fun, sketching out these characters as real people and then twisting them into something that people would maybe recognize, but then also be insulted by. And that was such
right.
a subtle way of saying this author is a jerk. And so you don't feel remorse that he's been murdered. And I'm not even sure anyone cared about solving it except Susan.
Right, and I think, one of her main motivations was to find the chapters. I
Right,
mean,
to
she
publish
kinda
the
was
book.
like, "We'll solve the murder, but, like, I'm not that concerned."
It's true.
Um,
It's true.
and I think when she discovers who the murderer is,
Mhm.
she does kinda follow through on trying to, gain justice, but it's only out of a sense of, like, true, like, that's the right thing to do. You can't
Right.
just let this person,
Get away with
murder
murder.
somebody and get away with it.
Yeah.
But I don't it wasn't like for any kind of, trying to get revenge for the author. It
Yeah.
was, she kind of thought, "Well, what else am I gonna do? I
Yeah.
have to turn you in."
Yeah, and that was really twisty. I mean, exactly right. She finds out who done it, and she's I think has a moment where she's thinking, "Oh, yeah," but then no, I can't. You've got to do the right thing, and turn yourself in. And again, I kept thinking about the collateral damage that this author left in his wake. Like he wasn't a good guy. He wrote 9 books, and his very last act was just to was to make an anagram out of the main character's name that was so ugly it would be offensive to
Right.
anyone who ever liked Atticus Punt. Which, if you unscramble those letters, it's I'm a stupid bad word I can't repeat. But I had a lot of fun thinking about that too. It's like he's so clever. And I think that
Yeah.
is part of what makes me love it. Not just that it was, an enjoyable ride down multiple levels, but also to think about how Horowitz are like what he built into it, how he orchestrated it, how he planned every single little thing to make sense at the end. And as somebody who thinks, about creative process a lot, I'm in awe of authors who do these things.
Yeah.
It's cool.
And to do it twice, essentially,
Yeah.
to have to do it, in the
Yeah.
same book, you're doing that whole exercise twice, which is even doubly more impressive.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Could
so,
yeah.
well, what would you, if you had to give it, um, a rating out of
Um,
5 Magpie murders, your old fashions, how many old fashions would you give this book?
Magpie Murders.
Yeah.
Um, I give it 4.6 magpies.
4.6 magpies. I like
Yeah.
the specificity of that. Uh,
How
I'm
about
gonna
you?
go with 4.1.
Oh,
So enthusiastic,
yeah.
but maybe not quite as enthusiastic, just because
Okay.
I feel like there should be something over the top.
Yeah.
I'm
Come
always
on.
looking for something
That
more.
that ending, Jamie, that ending was a freaking roller coaster.
It was. I agree. I agree.
Okay, I have
Um,
to say one thing though. So Alan Conway dies. He came out as gay late into his marriage. He was the father of a teenage boy who also is not portrayed well in this book as
no,
a
and he does
parent.
the same thing with him.
Yeah.
He has a character in his book based on his real child, and it's not a
Same name
flattering picture. Yeah.
and same name. Frederick and Freddie. And
Yeah.
Frederick was
Really
was
not nice.
horrible. Freddie, we don't get to meet at all. He's sort of with his mom. But don't you think there would be some probate in there where they would sue for some of the money? Because she was with
Oh,
him, right? When he wrote all the
yeah, I
books.
would think so. I
Yeah.
would think so.
That to me rang false. Otherwise, I bought the whole thing. I could see it happening. I felt like, yeah, this could happen. So, and I think that's why I got the point six in there. Because A, it reminds me of a simpler time and happy, summertime memories reading mystery novels. But also, could someone murder someone for a best-selling novel? Yeah, I think they could.
And if your publishing house is struggling and your primary author is gonna go, just ballistic and implode,
Yeah.
yeah, there's some
Ooh,
definite motivation.
what did you think of Susan Ryland, the main character, and her dedication to her work over her personal life?
Ooh, that is a good question.
Thank you.
Um, y you know, I feel like she clearly made that choice.
Mhm,
She was in a relationship, and at
mhm.
the end, she kind of decided to opt for the relationship, although at that point, many of those decisions had already been made for her in terms of choosing like, she no longer had a career, the whole
Sure,
thing
yeah, it
blew up
wasn't her
for her.
choice anymore because
So,
yeah.
but, I don't know, I feel like some people just choose that, and that's fine. She didn't seem sad. What about you?
I think one of the things I liked about the way he wrote it, and again, this is a 60-something-year-old guy writing about a woman in her 40s and getting in her head and using her voice. And so again, to me, it's all the crafting, right? Like I really like the way he did it. But he painted this character who's a very independent woman and she's working hard, she's hustling. I mean, there's this great scene where one of the first times she meets this jerk of an author, she's come running across London in the pouring rain and her hair's plastered to her face and her blouse is wet and she's just a wreck. She knocks over his wine as she's sitting down. I mean, she is just doing her best. And he
Yeah.
sort of hates her, like to the point that doesn't even manage the relationship. She's never been invited to his house that she effectively bought for him through her efforts. And there's this magical scene where she goes to visit her sister, and her sister has this family, and she works, and she comes home, and she's got the kids, and she puts this gorgeous dinner on the table, and Susan is like has no idea how her sister gets it done, nor does she want to. And so I thought
Right.
that was very generous and honest, and I felt like it was true for a lot of, women, both who are hustling to get it all done and then hustling just to do their best and somewhere between. So I like the way he wrote her. I thought she was believable.
That's an interesting question. So you on the flip side are
Mhm,
clearly you have a family and kids and you've
mhm.
been a
Behind me.
professional and
Mhm.
you're a hustler and you're out there working um to see a character like Susan who does not have those
Yeah,
trappings. Now you can clearly she doesn't have the benefits of those things either. But
yeah.
do you feel a little bit of like almost jealousy in that, oh, it would be
Did I say
interesting.
that?
No, it would be interesting to not have to worry about getting dinner on the table or taking kids to
Yeah,
um, practice or whatever, to focus on work. I mean, clearly, any given day, you could both want that and not want that. But
yeah.
did was there any kind of guilty pleasure to
Seeing her
seeing
not
her
have it?
lifestyle?
No, because I always wanted to be more like her sister. I always wanted the life that I'm so lucky to have. I always wanted children. I always wanted a partner. I'm blessed with that. I have really nice versions of both. Um, in fact, I always thought it was a bit curious for people that opted not to until I got older and then saw that, they had more money in the bank and less gray hairs. But I mean, it's just different choices. And so I thought he did a nice job of writing her not to be desperate or lacking, but very clear in her choices. And I thought that that made her a more powerful character. And so even though she struggles, we all struggle. I like the way um, she made clear choices and was unapologetic about them. Just like, yeah, I don't want to do that. Andreas, I'm sorry. I don't want to move to Greece and be married to you until, things come to a screaming halt at the end and she almost dies.
Well, I liked in that very first chapter because I did go back and kind of reread that first
Yeah.
chapter where she is getting ready to read the book and sitting there, and she mentions how she takes her clothes off and leaves them where they lie, and
Okay, I
she
don't do
puts
that.
on comfy clothes and then lies on the bed that hasn't been made.
Yeah.
Um, and I think everybody
She's
can
like a
kind of
fraternity boy,
yeah,
right?
it was, and she has her like sports car, kind of like her midlife crisis sports
Yeah.
car,
Yeah.
but that she's not, she's unapologetic about. But yeah, she's a good. I like her as a character, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I do kind of. I hope she chooses the hotel in Greece and the relationship. Like I think
I
those would
can't
be
tell you
fun
what
too.
happens. I can tell you what happens. It all works out.
It all works out. It all works out. She gets both. She gets both.
It ends up being a happy ending, which is not commonplace for whodunits, which is,
Very
it's
true.
kinda nice, right? She
Yeah.
doesn't die,
Yeah.
which is good. Spoiler alert, does not die. So let me ask you this, having read Magpie Murder, and it's very important not to say the Magpie Murder because the book is Magpie Murders. Um,
Yes.
would
He
you
goes
be
into yes, I mean,
yeah,
that's an element of the discovery.
right. Would you be interested in reading other books by this author?
Absolutely.
Oh,
I absolutely would. Yeah.
cool. Yeah, good. That
Um,
makes me happy.
it's a fun read. And it goes quickly. As
Yeah,
as you said, you start especially if you start listening to it, you don't wanna
right?
stop. It's not work.
I can't tell you how many times someone walked in the room and I have these, not this one, but I have these tiny earbuds you can't see in my ears, and my husband's talking to me and I'm like chopping salad, making dinner, and he's like, "Ah," like yelling at me, waving, and I'm like, "I'm sorry, I'm in my murder. What's happening?
What's
What do you
going yeah.
need?
What do you
What?"
need?
I'm in 1940s England, so kind of busy. It was just
So
like
what are you reading right now? What are your summer books that you're reading?
you're literally gonna laugh at me. Well, so I get a little OCD on these things. I just cranked through the first four Anthony Horowitz. It's the Detective Hawthorne Investigates books,
Oh,
which is where
wow.
he himself is a character, and it's really enjoyable because he is Horowitz himself is on the set of Midsummer Murders and working with his wife, who's a producer, which is all true. And so there's this funny blurring between fact and fiction, and you don't really know. I mean, it's a murder mystery, and it's probably not true, but You kinda don't really know because there's a lot of fact in it.
Right.
So I just crushed those, and in anticipation of our book club, I reread Magpie Murders, and then I decided to read its sequel, and so I'm about halfway through that, and it's the exact same technique where it's another Alan Conway mystery, but it's a prequel in a way.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So it's after this book, Susan does go to Greece, and she is with Andreas, and somebody seeks her out because their daughter is missing, and she had read an Alan Conway book and recognized something in it, but her daughter was one of the main characters in an Atticus Punt book. So Susan is pulled back to England to reread this book to help the family investigate potentially a murder. And so it's another book within a book, and it's very twisty, and I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, that's fun because I
Yeah,
actually was curious how the sequel worked since
yeah,
Alan Conway is obviously dead.
yeah.
And so the fake author in it was not
Mhm.
able to produce more books. But if it's dealing with a prequel and a murder around it, that makes total sense.
So you're rereading one of the Atticus Punt investigate books, and it actually give it's really very sweet because it's before James Fraser has joined this detective ring, and it explains a little bit more about Atticus Punt as a character, and so that is also really very sweet and kind of enjoyable. And as soon as I'm done this book, I will be back to probably Sally Hepworth's new book called The Soulmate, which is fabulous. I actually read that before it was published. And then my good friend Sarah Pekkanen, who maybe you should invite her to be on your podcast.
I don't
International
know, Sarah
best-selling
Packer.
author Sarah Pekkanen. She's amazing.
Oh,
She's like a 12-time New York Times bestseller, and she's a brand new book out called Gone Tonight. And I've
ooh,
already read that, and that is really, really fast turny. It's great.
oh, fun. Have you done
Yeah.
a lot of book promotion with your job, or is it?
I have worked with a lot of authors, and but I became friends with Sally Hepworth and Sarah Pekkanen through a mutual friend, and they're, like, beyond. I mean, they're, like, you know, international best-selling authors, one from Australia, one locally in, Chevy Chase, and so they're just I'm in awe of their talent, and
Yeah.
they write just page-turning fast reads, which I find so compelling, because I get tired at the end of the day, so I need something that keeps my attention.
I don't ever imagine you tired. I have a really hard time. How did I describe you once? The Energizer Bunny of
Advertising, I think.
public relations and
Yeah, PR
advertising.
advertising, yeah, that's
Yeah.
me. I have a
Yeah.
little I have a we might not be able to see it behind me, but there is a drum, and I have cymbals attached to it. I just walk around the house banging it. So what are you reading? What new things
So,
have crossed your desk?
so interesting. So I just read a book. There was a nonfiction I just finished called Salt, which was actually very interesting. It was all about the history of salt.
I've
And
seen that.
it
I haven't read it though.
um I read it for a book club I'm in with some college roommates, and we were kind of split on whether we liked it. I really enjoyed it,
Mhm.
and it because you don't realize how important salt was
Game changer.
when through history just to preserve
Mhm,
food and everything
mhm.
else. And so it was an interesting lens into to see kind of civilization and what people did and how important it was. And it motivated me to make some of my own sea salt. So I
Wait,
actually was
how?
so I was at the beach and I got like a 5 gallon bucket of ocean water, and then I boiled it in my turkey fryer until it boiled down probably 25% of what it was.
Yeah,
And then in batches, I would put it in cookie sheets and let it dry out in the sun.
amazing.
And it turns into crystals and stuff. And I made, I
It's
probably
very
spent,
fine though. When you make it like that, it's like, almost like sand, right? It's, like, super fine.
well, it would kind of clump together in pretty
Okay.
big chunks.
Oh,
So it
really?
was actually bigger. It was smaller crystals than
Mhm,
like kosher salt, but bigger chunks overall.
mhm.
Um, I've tried it a few times on things. So it's Rehoboth
And?
Beach. It was good. Um,
Okay.
Now I probably spent 5 hours making 2 cups of salt
So you're not retiring
and
on this?
probably $40 worth of propane and various other things. So I don't know. I don't recommend it as
It's a
an
premium
efficient.
premium
it-
product.
It's a premium product, though. Yes, for sure. Uh,
So
but it
5th
was kind
grade
of fun.
science fair, my dad, because I had to come up with something. So my dad actually put pieces of plexiglass together over a cookie sheet that we made salt water out of. But no, we made it from like Morton salt and water, and then it sat there and like the way he configured it, I think he got an A on this project for me. It was, you know, the cookie
Like
sheet
all,
was black. Yeah, and then it evaporated, and then the water trickled down the side, and what was left in the pan was a very fine salt because it had been dehydrated, salt
yeah,
that we'd been reclaimed. So it never got crystallized again in the same way, but it was tasty.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm also reading right now for my the next podcast is a prayer for Owen Meany,
Oh, I
which I
love
don't know if
that
you've read.
book. Oh my God, I love that book. John Irving. I can still hear
Yeah.
his voice. And I never listened to it. I just read it. But
Oh,
reading
funny.
it, oh, and Meaning became so real because he has a high pitched, squeaky voice, and I could just hear it. I
I
really
am
enjoyed
listening
that.
to it, and
Yeah.
it's impressive. Like the voice is really good. Like the Owen Meany voice is very good.
Yeah. It's
So,
really
um,
good. That's
yeah,
throwback too. You're doing some like old school
it is
books.
throwback. I'm trying to do a mix, but I'm also
Yeah.
asking people. Like I asked you, and
Yeah.
you were great. You came back with like 4 or 5 suggestions.
Is that ridiculous?
So, yeah, well, you were very enthusiastic, which I appreciated.
Which is on brand for Susie Wagner.
It's on. It's your brand and buzz.
It's the Brandon Buzz.
That's
No,
right.
no better
Um,
segue to be
for the
in.
listeners, Brandon Buzz is Susie's company name. So
BrandonBuzz.biz. We're always here to help
that's right. That's right.
to the
Good plug.
listeners.
Good
Yeah,
plug.
thank you. Well, you open the door.
Well, well, I was trying to describe, I had written, I was like, how do I describe how I know Susie? Because we
Mm,
know each other. We
long
probably
time,
met, gosh, 20 years ago.
at least.
Um,
Yeah.
because you were trying to get me to put an ad in Time Magazine.
Was it Time
Uh,
Magazine, the LA Times, the National Journal? Probably Time
yeah,
Magazine.
no, at the time,
Yeah.
the first one for me was Time Magazine.
Okay.
Um, and then I think and so then I bought a number of ads, and then we
Mhm.
figured out that our sons were in the same Boy Scout troop, so we
Oh
became,
my gosh, I forgot about that. They were
yeah, kind of
starting with that Boy
neighborhood
Scout
friends.
troop too.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, and thanks for your insights on the book and your suggestion of the book. So I'm looking forward to the sequel.
Same. I'm happy to come back and discuss that or a nonfiction, twisty tale of woe or whatever you got going on. So this is a lot of fun. Thank you, Jamie.
Outlander, the 11th book or something. Yeah.
All right, the show is also good. So you just want to watch
Yeah.
the show on Showtime, I think it is. You're good to go.
Well, I'll have to check that out. Well, thank you. And if you like the podcast, please subscribe. And we'll be coming back with more of One Drink Book Club. So thank you very much.